We're talking about false flags, we're talking about disinformation, there's a bit of history, there's a bit of humor. And there should be a lot of support from us, especially because our next speaker has been up all night taking care of the DCTF contestants. So he needs a lot of energy from us, so let's give him that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hello, greetings everybody. Thank you very much for staying for this final day of our amazing conference, and thank you very much for being here with me for my presentation. I'm gonna be talking about, hopefully not gonna be running late, and hopefully it's gonna be interesting for you. Basically, today we're gonna talk about false flags. What's the history of false flags, and where are we now? Where are we standing right now? But in order to understand the present, we need to look back in the past, and we need to see what happened, what people before us did. And of course, it starts from the phrase false flags. And the phrase false flags was actually defined as you can see in the Oxford English Dictionary. But it was defined in the 16th century. Only in the 16th century, this phrase was actually put into the dictionary. Which is pretty interesting, because you say, oh, well, it's like 16th century, it should be older, no? And then you actually can find out that the term flag itself was defined no more than 39 years earlier. So if you lived in the 15th century or 14th century, there was no term coined as false flag. But, where do pirates come into all of this? Well, the answer is they don't. And you shouldn't be disappointed, because the great period of piracy, which was in the 17th century, has a lot of things to teach us. And of course, we cannot forget about the greatest pirate of all, Mr. Blackbeard. And I don't know if he was had smoking ears, but he was a pretty well-known guy. So 300 years later, we actually can find that in the Oxford English Dictionary, there's a different term, and the different term says, or different definition. And the definition says, a false flag is a flag used by a ship to misrepresent its nationality. Oh, okay, so we're getting there. It's interesting because if you dig deeper, in 1914, you see that it was allowed for a ship to run a false flag up until before the attack. So you would be like, hey, I'm your friend, I'm getting closer, I'm your friend. Oh shit, change the flag, now I'm gonna attack you. And the others were like, okay, what the heck happened? And it was totally normal, it was totally perfectly okay. So, fine. But, what happened before? Of course, people should have done this before, and they did. If you remember the Great Fire of Rome, which happened in the year 64, there was a great fire, a lot of people died. Then people started saying that the actual emperor back then, the Nero emperor, he actually set the fire himself, and he wanted to torch the city. Which is kind of nonsense, why would you want to torch your own city? But, let's go with that. So what did Nero do? He said, oh, fine, let's blame the Christians. And not only did he blame the Christians, but he also threw them to lions, and he threw them in a big, what remained of a Colosseum, because it burnt down. And basically they got, he kind of killed a lot of Christians, and forcing them to take the blame of the fire. So that was okay, interesting, but let's go a little bit closer to our times. And then let's go into 1939 with Operation Himmler. So these three fine gentlemen here on the right, so this guy in the middle, I can't pronounce his name, I have to write it down on a note, he's Heinrich Himmler, Reinhard Heydrich, and Heinrich Müller. So Heinrich Himmler is the guy in the middle here. And he said, okay, we need to do something in order to have, to be like, kind of, to be allowed to start our aggressions, military aggressions. And we need kind of an scapegoat, or we need like to have a reason to do that. And basically they said, okay, in 1939, on the 29th of August, so 2 days, or 1 day before, so like some days before they actually invaded Poland, some people, some officers from military Nazi officers, they went into this like station here, and it was a broadcasting station, and it was like Gleiwitz. It was Gleiwitz broadcasting station, and the incident is called Gleiwitz incident. And basically, they went dressed as Polish officers. They went there and started broadcasting messages of hate against Nazi Germany. And not only did they do that, but they also did some other actions in order to have a reason for Germany to invade Poland. And little did they know, like some days later, actually Nazi Germany invades Poland, and then they start the Second World War. So historians say that the Operation Himmler was the first act of war, or the first act that's actually started the Second World War. Of course, there was a lot of build-up before then, so it wasn't only this one, but you know, they started. What about the Americans? The Americans said, okay, in 1962, in Cuba, there was a revolution around that time. Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, they took control over the country. They ruled out the the American puppet that was installed by the Americans. And they started building their society. And when they built their society, they decided to go with, some people might say, the wrong option, like implementing communism. So the Americans, of course, they got worried. And there's this guy who said, okay, let's do something about it. And how should we do it? Well, let's do a covert operation, like a false flag. So this guy here, General Lehman Leinitzer, on the left, and he said that, okay, let's do something interesting. Let's blow up US ships, and let's do terror attacks on US soil, pretending to be Cuban agents. Luckily, the president back then, Kennedy, said no. So he put a stop to all of this. And this was a plan from the Joint Chief of Staff from Department of Defense. So I don't know what would have happened if they actually would have invaded Cuba or did something like a retaliation attack. Because, you know, like Cuban Missile Crisis, like some years later, it didn't go quite well. So, enough of history, you know, like there's a lot of examples here back and then like you can find out even more. Those are like a tiny bit of examples. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a security researcher working in Kaspersky's Great. This slide is the favorite slide of one of my friends. She always complains about it, you know, but I always stick it here so she can see it every time I present. You might know me from the threat intelligence work I do within my team, which is a global research and analysis team. And I'm doing threat intelligence and threat research. So some of my tools are open source, like Clara, and also I'm doing some honeypots projects. So who attended last year DefCamp? Who attended my talk? Oh, some people. Oh, nice. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. If you remember from last year, I said during my disinformation talk, I said that the information war, the one that we have, defined, has 3 parts: cyber espionage, cyber sabotage, and mass opinion manipulation. Last year I talked about this one. This year I'm going to talk about this one. And of course, the cyber parts, espionage and sabotage, they also use malware. So let's see, what is this malware about? What are we doing here? So, of course, when you analyze malware, you see some artifacts. There are some artifacts in the binary when you're doing static analysis, for example. And those artifacts, they might give you some interesting ideas of what the actual malware does, or not. So for example, we have debug paths. In each, like, there's a possibility whenever you compile your binary from, like, it gets translated from the like high-level programming code into binary machine. When you compile your binary, it inserts the path where your project was located. And this is like a well-known feature, kind of, in order for you to be able to debug your programs a little bit later, by you or by somebody else. But then, when you develop malware or other types of programs, you might actually have these debug paths. And of course, we see here Lily from HR developing BIOS code, which, that's okay, no? This is basically from a piece of code from a BIOS from a ThinkPad laptop. You can find it. It's on VirusTotal, this sample. It's like totally legit, you know. I think it's pretty okay, but there's a one downside. Come on, if you're gonna use versioning system, don't use SVN. Come on, like what year is this? Like seriously? At least they're using something. What about compilation timestamps? Well, they're also meaningful, you know, because you might see whenever a malware was created, and if the attackers are not careful enough to remove the compilation timestamps, then you might actually have a glimpse of their campaign. You might see, when did they compile the first, of course, after a cluster all the malware, where did they compile the first time, when was the first time they compiled that malware family, when did they try to like stop, what were the periods of times, months, days, when was their working times? Basically, there are campaigns which we managed to infer that they had a time zone of, like, for example, plus GMT plus 8, GMT plus 9, because they were compiling all those samples in that time frame. We have other malware families or like APT campaigns where they work for during 1st of January or 31st of December. And if you correlate this with some, let's say, traits from culture or some people, you might say that some countries, they do not celebrate New Year on the 1st of January. Some countries, they do not celebrate Christmas on the 21st of December. So you might infer some knowledge about that stuff. Anybody recognizes this specific compilation timestamp, 24th of March 2015? Well, from my point of view, I think it's pretty interesting because it's the compilation timestamp of a campaign that we announced this year, Operation Shadowhammer. And it was a campaign that infected the Asus like big company. And they managed to get into the network and they managed to deploy a supply chain attack. And how did they do it? Well, they took a binary which was legitimately created by Asus, they implanted their malware, and then they pushed it on their production server. So they compromised their build environment, their build servers. But the sample that they pushed on the production server, which was signed by Asus, it had this compilation timestamp here. And it's interesting because the original sample had the same compilation timestamp. So the question is, were they in their network in 2015? Did they change it? Because it's trivial to change the compilation timestamp. Who knows? Of course, strings are easy to detect. Like this is a Cloud Atlas sample. They have like they were some encrypted with XOR, I would say obfuscated. And basically after the obfuscation, you can clearly see the samples, the CNC server, and like some commands they're doing here. So those things are in the sample. Now it's get a little bit interesting because you might say, okay, let's use code. Let's say if an attacker reuses the same code. So an attacker might say, oh, I have this debug function, or I have this module of communication module, and they have like a lot of samples. They don't want, it's like it's not feasible to rewrite your own communication module all the time. So what do? You actually take the same pieces of code and then you add it in other projects. So basically you have like multiple samples which reuse the same code. If you have capabilities of actually detecting what other samples are, if the other samples are reusing some parts of the code, you can correlate and you can infer some information about it. But what about reuse of 0 days? 0 day, 0.1, 1 day exploits, whatever. You name them. Well, it's the same. And it's actually interesting because nowadays, with a lot of zero-day brokers, you see a zero-day vulnerability being exploited by either multiple APT actors or like in different parts of sectors. And this, like, you know, you might say, are they the same actor, or do they have like the same, they bought the same zero-day vulnerability, or like who's leaking those vulnerabilities, or like what's happening? You might have a correlation, or you might not have a correlation. Okay, so this is like a short introduction of how do we do research with malware. And I'm pretty sure you might know about it, so I'm confident it was okay. Let's see like what happened, like how do we put these things in practice. Of course, a very important paper that I also took inspiration from when I'm gonna like present you some of the cases is this one, like deception tactics and modding attribution. It was written and presented at Virus Bulletin by two good friends of mine, Juan and Brian Bartolomeo. And those two good friends of mine, usually they look like this when they work. And when they presented, they had like a history of false flags attacks that happened up to 2016. So what I'm doing now, like I'm going to present some of the parts that they mentioned, and I also am going to add some new stuff that happened after their publication, based on our research from Kaspersky. So, Cloud Atlas, 2014. Cloud Atlas, everything here is public. You can research, you can find information, and of course, when it's not public, I'm going to mention. Cloud Atlas was like an APT actor trying to, like targeting diplomatic entities, and the idea was that when we found out, we also knew about Red October, which happened in 2012. And when we saw some of the phishing emails, some of the spear phishing websites, but what about mostly phishing emails? When we saw them, they had like a very, 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 very good resemblance of what Red October did. And they were basically using the same methods, the same types of phishing emails as Red October. And that was like pretty weird, you know, like what the heck. Then we dug deeper and we found out that they were communicating with South Korea. And we were like, seriously? Is this like an actor from South Korea, like South Korean speaking actor? It turns out they actually infected routers in people's houses, and they were using those routers to proxy connections. So basically, they were like mimicking to be located in South Korea. That was pretty cool. Also, there are some strings in Arabic, in Hindi, also God Save the Queen and John Clark. Strings that they put in malware to like appear to speak English, I guess, I don't know. Or to be like appear British, I don't know. Okay, Wild Neutron, 2013. Wild Neutron had like, again, like it's an APT campaign, but it had two interesting strings. It had the string La Revedere, which is like weird from my point of view because it's in Romanian, clearly. Or it also had like the Russian string Uspeshno, which means like completed. Like, is this correct? Like any Russians here? Successful, yes, successful, thank you. So it had those strings, and you might say, okay, so those guys who are using Wild Neutron, they're Romanian, no? Like, well, no, they weren't. Also, in order to trick researchers, they set up a lot of MLM schemes. They tried to, like, they had like 10 companies, like front companies, front websites. They were doing a lot of stuff. They had like a Bitcoin scamming scheme going on. They were pretty, you know, they wanted to like hide in the water, you know. Tiger Milk. Tiger Milk was not so well-known APT campaign, also targeting governmental entities. But what's interesting is that they signed their malware using the Stuxnet certificate. So we found a malware signed with the same Realtek certificate that Stuxnet was signed. But there are some questions. Like, first of all, why would you sign something with a certificate that was stolen 5 years ago? And then the second question is, how the hell did you get your hands on the certificate? Which was revoked, of course, but how did you get your hands? Like, anybody knows? Like, anybody? So, okay, there's no Tiger Milk developers in this crowd. That's pretty cool. um, a newer false flag campaign, which is kind of mild. I wouldn't call it a false flag, but I just wanted to mention it. You know, some banks in Latin America and also in other parts of the world, they got this message, and basically they were saying, "We are fancy, but we have chosen the bank name to target our next DDoS attack." They were actually doing DDoS attacks. They were doing like a DDoS attack for 0.5 gigabits for 30 minutes, and then when then they were like giving the bank 1 day, and then they would start a DDoS attack with 1 gigabit, 10 gigabits, and so on. So the DDoS attacks were real, kind of. But they said, okay, we're Fancy Bear, search for Fancy Bear, and you'll see our capabilities. It wasn't like, I don't think it was like that. And then, of course, banks, we told like whoever asked us, don't pay them because they might come back 1 year later, you know. And then we get to DUQ. DUQ 2.0, you might have heard about DUQ 2.0, Stuxnet, Flame, the entire family, the tilted family. Yeah. So basically, if you don't know about them, go read them up. There's like a lot of information about DUQ. This campaign was highly active in 2015, and it's, at least for me, it's very interesting because it was used to infect Kaspersky. So they infected our company and they stayed in our network. What's interesting about that one is that they had 2 strings, which were like pretty interesting. They had like the Romanian anti-hacker string, and they had Ugly Gorilla. Anybody knows what Ugly Gorilla refers to? No? Close, but not there. So the Romanian anti-hacker was basically a way of doing reverse RDP connections. Of course, we don't, like in our network, there was no possibility from the internet to actually access the servers from inside because of firewalls. So what did they do? They actually used proxies, and whenever the infected machine would beam to like outside CNC server, it would send a packet, and in the packet, if the packet had this Romanian anti-hacker string, basically it recognized as a magic packet, and then that connection was used to proxy from the outside to get into the network, and then from the network they would be able to connect to other machines through on RDP. So this is public. You can see like how they did it. It's pretty interesting because like back then in 2015 there were only 2 Romanian people doing research, and it was actually even before I got hired. But then, the Ugly Gorilla is something interesting. The Ugly Gorilla is basically a guy from the APT1, the comment crew guy. Yes, his name is Wang Dong. His nickname is, and hear me out, Jack Wang. But anyway, he's basically one of the 5 PLA officers that are actually indicted by FBI. And I'm pretty sure that he's actually developing malware right now in China. I don't think he has like any will to exit China. But yeah, basically we found the string in there. We found the nickname, and it was like, oh, okay, fine. So this malware is made by Chinese people. Like, no, you just put a string in there. Now, the second part of my talk is going to be about what's happening, like what can we do like in the new age. And as I mentioned, those are the things that were mentioned by Brian and Juan's talk. Now, those are some interesting things that are basically I want to talk about. And the first thing I want to talk about is about the Rana leak. So in 2019, in May this year, there was a website, hidden reality website, and this website was published, and basically they claimed they had information about Rana Institute, which was an entity in Iran, which was part of doing hacking and trying to doing like cyber operations. And they had the website, and they were like leaking stuff about agents, about malware about operations. There was a guy or a Twitter handler. They were doing on Twitter. They were basically disseminating information on Twitter, disseminating information on Telegram, on the website. On the website, you could search for information. It was kind of a WikiLeaks style. It was like pretty well made. And then like the question is like, who is behind this leak? Like what happens and why would you do it? And some of the information is veridic. Like some of the information, maybe it's not. You don't know. Based on our research, we believe that with like with like good measurement that they are connected to the they are connected with the Sophacy. We suspect that they might be connected with the Sophacy gang, and this is based on some domains they used and they did a mistake and they forgot to do something. So basically, it's in our private report we talk about more about why we suspect this connection. Then we have like Dark Hotel, which happened last month, or we wrote about the report last month. The Dark Hotel campaign, which was pretty well known, but it resurfaced with a new wave of attacks. Basically, spear phishing, but it was like highly profiled spear phishing. And then like they had like a multi-stage infection, and they also had like a rat malware in it, basically after the infection in order to control the victim's computer. So this was pretty cool. But then what we found out, it's not much, but we did find some interesting stuff. So basically we found like a North Korean user agent. So basically whenever they were using, their malware was connecting to the CNC computer, like servers, they used the KP country code, and then basically you might say like they copied, pasted, and they forgot to change it or something. And also they used the Chronima font, which is used mostly by North Koreans, so people in North Korea. I haven't seen anybody or like any malware or like anything, no malware, sorry, anybody using the Chronima font outside from North Korea. So you might say, is this like North Korean malware? Well, the question is most probably not, but they just implemented these false flags in order to try to lure like researchers to think to like do the wrong attribution. And last but not the least, the most important one from my point of view happened in February, Olympic Destroyer. So again, this is public information, like this, oops, this is not something that oh, wow. I think my computer is shutting down. Okay. Nice. So, exactly. The Lazarus group infected my computer. No, it's gonna power off. It's gonna power off. There's no way to like, yeah. Okay, so Olympic Destroyer. Do you have a laptop, Alex? Maybe you can plug it in and then like you can continue. But meanwhile, Olympic Destroyer, basically it was used for infecting the Olympics that happened in South Korea, and then like they were trying to blame. Of course, people were saying, "Oh, North Korea is gonna like do something. They're gonna like try to ruin the games and everything." And then, the first day of the Olympic Games, shit hit the fan. Like people couldn't print their tickets. Like it was a chaos in the network, and like a lot of computers were like knocked down, and like they couldn't be usable anymore, and it was like super bad. The malware was a worm. It was spreading on other computers, and basically the idea was that they were trying to. People asked who did this. And there were like some interesting resemblance. So first of all, there was a resemblance of the encryption key, which was identical to a Blue Norov sample. That was like, so basically Lazarus, a subdivision of Lazarus. There was a key with identical code, so basically code reuse. Then, everybody said, some people said, "Oh my God, this is it! Like we found the link. It's definitely these guys." And then we analyzed the PE format, the rich headers, and in the rich headers, we noticed that the rich headers were identical with another sample that we found out earlier. So basically what, another blue North sample. So basically what the attackers did, they copied the rich sample from another, the rich P metadata from another sample, they added into their own malware. Furthermore, we noticed that there were inconsistencies from what they did and actually what they were trying to show. So there was like a minor inconsistency. And this is what, wow, nice, we have it back, thank you. So we should look it further. If I can change my clicker, please. Also, it's perfect, perfect. So it's in the rich header, and basically those headers were identical, but they shouldn't be identical unless compiled on the same computer. So this was from the Olympic Destroyer. This was from another malware. Then we actually we posted posted this one in March, and we said, okay, there's a problem with the rich header, and this is what we did. And then later, in the summer, we actually attributed the attack on the Olympic destroyer to Hades, which is one of the Russian-speaking APTs. So, you know, what's going to happen? Like, the problem is with attribution is that it's very tricky, and we live in a time where it's very easy to attribute, like to do geopolitical attribution and to try to change people's opinion. From my point of view, there are 3 rules of the attribution club. The first rule is don't do attribution. Like, don't do it. Like, research your malware, analyze it, see what it does. You get more meaningful information versus like who did it, like who was it. Like, it can be anybody. Like, you found a malware, like fixed your problem. If you have to do it, if you have to do attribution, be very careful what you attribute to. Because it's like you can have false flags, you can have mistakes, you can have an agenda that you might want to push. And the problem is if you do it in a wrong way, you might actually have, oh my God, consequences. And some of those consequences can actually be deadly. And the reason I'm saying this one is because of something that happened in autumn or summer. Can you click next? Thank you. So you might remember this tweet from the Israel Defense Forces. And basically they managed to find out like basically a place where some Hamas were doing some cyber attacks, and they went like, pew, pew, they nuked the place. I'm actually impressed they didn't nuke this building as well. So they were like, I'm actually more impressed they tweeted about it. But they said, okay, we found those guys. They were doing some hacking against Israel. We know for sure they did it, like let's nuke them. What if they didn't? I'm not contesting this tweet. I'm pretty sure they have their reasons. But let's think in a like hypothetical way. You know, like what if somebody hacks another like fourth-party collection, which is a topic again Juan and my manager Costin Raju talked about it. Like what if somebody hacks an attacker and then they start deploying attacks from their like the victims, the third attacker that basically. Somebody hacks an attacker who hacks somebody, and then basically they launch the attacks on behalf of the first attacker, and then you do the attribution in the wrong way. And that's the problem of nowadays cyber security ecosystem, I would say, because it's okay to have detection, it's okay to have rules, but you need to have more. It's not enough just to have like, okay, I want to do detection, I want to do stuff, and it's enough. Sorry. Now we are moving towards the next step, and the next step is to try to find out similarity samples. I wouldn't call it attribution per se, I would say similarity engines. And it's not only like, for example, we are doing something, but also like Intezer is also a company doing the similarity stuff. And watch out for companies who are doing similarity stuff because it's super, you can get like super meaningful information. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have this like a command and control server and you analyze the server part and then there's like an encryption algorithm. You can apply the code similarity to the encryption algorithm and then you can find the client samples implementing the same encryption algorithm, no matter what it is. So it's very powerful to do this kind of research and then you can find new cluster of samples of new clusters of attacks. I just want to show you something that I use every day and you might want to use it. It's called the Threat Intelligence Portal, which is free to use, like just if you want to use it. And it's something, a place where I also use it to do like similarity and to do threat intelligence research. Oops, sorry. With this being said, and like with this page not showing up, this is it. Try it out. See what if you like it. It's like free to use. Like use it if you want to. It's like kind of like VirusTotal. It basically shows you what telemetry we have for these specific campaigns on samples and malware or whatever. So with this being said, thank you very much for being with me and sorry for the technical inconvenience.
Now, for someone who hasn't slept all night, you're super fresh. So let's take a few questions. We have one over here. Keep your hands up. Let's start with someone in the back this time. We promise we'll get to you as well.
Okay.
Let's start with someone there. Keep your hand up. Yep, the mic is there. Yeah.
Hi. So on the topic of attribution, I know FireEye have been doing it for a long time, and what FireEye have been doing is hackback as well. What's your opinion on hackback? When you attribute that a specific APT has been targeted to you and you fight back.
So FireEye is a really good company and they do some awesome research. And I trust their judgment on attribution. Though I think that hackback should not be used. And unfortunately, more and more companies or governments, they try to justify hackback as a ways of like expanding their own cyber operation campaigns. So I think they shouldn't be doing it. But yeah, whatever does, yeah, whoever, like, you're free to do whatever you want. Okay, another question?
Awesome. We have one. Okay, please stand up so we can.
Somewhere there.
Hello. Yeah, nice presentation. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
My question would be like more personal. I really love, because since you're here and you have a lot of knowledge, would be like for you, what is like the coolest malware that you analyzed personally? What is like the coolest or the smartest anonymization techniques that you found analyzing some malwares? And what are like the hottest MLMs that you found and saw analyzing stuff?
So I'm not doing, part of my job, I'm not doing reversing or like doing anything with samples. I know that from what my knowledge, the VM Protect package is the most complete and the most advanced package to like protect your samples. Okay. But I don't know any other techniques. Then you asked about the emulators.
No, anonymization techniques. What's like the coolest anonymization techniques that you found personally or heard about it?
What do you mean anonymization when you say like...
Someone is attacking someone and they don't want to be caught handily. So how they do it to make it like personally look cool but also make the job?
So, yeah, I mean, okay, I understand your question. Well, the first thing is you hack like somebody else's servers and then you proxy to through their servers.
Standard, yes.
That's the first thing you do. There was another example where, of course, you plant false flags, a lot of false flags in order to... trick the researchers. So let me tell you another story of false flags. I don't know the APT actor or like who was doing that, but I think it was Sofasy. I think if I remember correctly. Basically, they were like having a C2 server, and they noticed that the researchers or people were fetching samples. So basically, they noticed people were probing them. They also knew that the IR team on the SOC center, they would clean the infection. So what did they do? They started giving out, from that day onward, they started giving out a different sample from a different malware. Let's say they were like, I don't know, Russian-speaking APT, and they delivered the Chinese-speaking sample. And then the entire SOC team, they spent all their days and night analyzing the Chinese sample, which wasn't even related to the campaign. Okay. That's also something that I think it's good.
Awesome. And last one, really tricky, was the money laundering techniques, please?
Sorry, what?
Money laundering techniques. The hottest one in the latest time.
Am I being on a quiz here? I'm sorry. Let's discuss it off topic afterwards.
Cool, man.
Cool.
Referrals to what? From my point of view, I'm not discussing their allegiance or anything. I'm just discussing facts. It's more about are we allowed to discuss about history? Can we this is what they were in 1939. I mean, it's history. I'm not encouraging anything, or this is basically history. This is what happened. That was the guy's name.
Okay, next question. We have
Hey Dan,
here.
thanks for the presentation. My question is a bit long.
Sure.
So, in terms of attribution, we now have attribution being given in public advisories, for example, from US CERT, which is linked to the DHS, Department of Homeland Security. Do you think that's problematic? Do you think, given that attribution is hard to do, it shouldn't be made public in advisories and advisory notes and things like that because people might act on it and draw the wrong conclusion? Or do you think it's correlated with other information they have, for example, from intelligence agencies? And one case of that was the attack on Sony, when the government came out and said it's North Korea, and the security research community came out and said, well, there's no actual evidence, it's North Korea. And later we found out that the NSA had probes in North Korea's servers, so probably they had information that way. So do you think it's unhealthy to give attribution to nation states or countries in advisories and things like that? Thank you.
Cool. Amazing question. So about the Sony hack, actually we attributed the link to North Korea 1 month before NSA came and actually publicly acknowledged it was North Korea. But the core question is, of course, intelligence agencies, they have information that is not publicly available. Private companies, they generate threat intel that is not publicly available. We also do it as well. But I think it's, I'm not sure if it's healthy or not to put it on a public register. But if you do put it in a public register, you have to say why. What's your, it's not enough to say, we attribute this to North Korea. A better way to do it is say, we have low, medium, high confidence this is attributed to North Korea, and the reasons are, for example, a log from a VPN server and they logged in from North Korea. So this is how we attributed Lazarus. We found a connection from a North Korean IP address. There are no VPNs in North Korea. Or this sample resembles another sample, or we found this, and that. It's very important to say why, but my feeling is that you shouldn't do the attribution. Let the others do it, or just don't do attribution. Just say, okay, this is the advisory, these are the YARA rules, la la la, protect yourself. You don't have to does it matter where the malware came from? Also, I wouldn't trust the US CERT that much, mostly because they have like shitty ERA rules, one reason. No, but they do have like also some rules that didn't work, so they have to work on that part. It doesn't matter, like. Question.
One more question there. Okay, please stand. And we're going to take like...
Is this on? Okay.
Yes, it is.
Now, this year, a German journalist called Ronald Eichenberg, discovered that Kaspersky antivirus was injecting JavaScript code into basically every single user's websites, effectively acting as a man in the middle. I have a very simple question. What were you guys thinking by doing that?
So the bug that you're referring to is correct. It was in the module, it was in the web module, which I think it needs a little bit more of reworking. The way how you can protect against web attacks is you need to see the traffic. And basically you need to be able to intercept, to see if there's some weird things going. What happened is that the JavaScript that was requested, injected into the page in order to protect the users, which, by the way, you can turn off the option. The JavaScript that was injected was different, basically allowing you to user X requested from that location, user Y requested from the other location. It was based on the ID, like IDs. And that was a bug. And clearly, they fucked up. Like development team fucked up. I don't work on the antivirus, but they did fuck up. Now they're requesting it from a standalone location, blah, 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 blah. But the question is it's the eternal question, okay, you don't trust the antivirus to protect you. How can the antivirus protect you? Sure. It's up to you to decide to do. But that was a bug, and it was fixed.
Cool.
I think Dumitra had a last question.
Yes, one last question.
You can shout. No, shout. Shout, yeah.
No, please use the mic so everyone can hear you.
What
Thanks.
about Romanian government attribution done in less than 24 hours?
Sorry, what?
There were some websites being hacked last summer of public institutions, and we've seen some press releases pointing at Chinese actors in less than 24 hours.
Yeah, I don't think it's wise to just jump the ship and say hey, it's them because we found they were connecting to a Chinese server or something. I don't know what.
It was the time frame, even better.
The time frame, yeah. I wouldn't trust attribution solely on time frame. I wouldn't trust attribution solely on debug strings, on strings in the malware, because again, false flags. It's okay to do attribution, but you have to specify why, and your reasoning needs to be strong.
Cool.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan.